to the slide. We had before here, we were just talking about the one-step methods to integrate the evolution equations, the Newton's equations. And now we will get to multi-step methods. And later on, I have some slides on symplectic integrators. So we had, last slide was this Runge-Kutta integrator, fourth order integrator, error, fifth order integrator. This is always a good choice when you don't know what to use and you program, let's say, some code, then the Runge-Kutta integrator. Fourth order is the classical Runge-Kutta integrator. Okay. Then so far we have only used the information from the system from one step, let's say k, to the step k+1, and we threw away all the information that we gained before from the step.
Sorry, Christoph.
Yeah.
I think we lost your share screen. Just wait a minute. We are working on it.
Okay.
Okay. I think you should share your screen because now we don't have it.
Okay.
Great. It's working. Thank you.
Okay. Wait. Which screen do you see now?
Now I see the slides.
Okay. The time integrators, multi-step methods.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Sorry.
Good. Thank you.
Technical problems here. But I'm glad it's working great so far, I guess.
Yeah, it's working great. Yeah.
Okay, so we had this one-step methods, the Runge-Kutta method, where we used only the information from step k to k+1, and we discarded all information that we gained before, which is somewhat, well, we had all this work done to get all the information from the previous steps, so why just don't use them to get a higher order accuracy, let's say, for the next steps. This then leads us to the so-called multi-step methods, where these methods also use the information from a defined but arbitrary number of former steps. The advantage is clear. We have higher accuracy, yeah, more efficient, for not much more computational effort because we have already gained this information. There are, of course, some disadvantages. Like always, there is always a backside of the medal, and you need more memory. So, for example, if you have to store all the information that you have gained from the system from the steps before, and this also leads to more complicated algorithms. Moreover, if you have let's say, a multi-step method that depends also on the steps before your current step, then you have to have these information from the steps before already for your initial conditions, okay? So often these multi-step methods have, for the first step, a different integrator and then switch to a multi-step scheme. I will now here only give a short example of a linear multi-step method because we won't talk about it later. This is just for the sake of completeness that you know that also these method exists and were widely used in the 80s and 90s when the Adam-Bash force algorithm were developed. Okay, so more or less this is more for historical reasons. Now you have a multi-step method and you can just write it down, a linear multi-step method where the components here, the factors for each previous step are linear. So you have a linear combination of all your previous steps. If you have a S-step multi-method, then you have this S steps before which you have calculated. And so this is the left-hand side of your equation, and then the right-hand side is just, again, a function. And there's, again, a parenthesis missing at the very end, which depends on the evaluation of the slope function f here at all previous S steps. if you write this in the sum, you end up here with such term with the first as equals 1, and then the choice of these coefficients determine in principle the method. Okay, so the order of the method, the number of previous sub-steps that you use to calculate the new values. So for BS equals 0, again, you get a explicit scheme. Ah, you don't hear. Sorry. Can you hear me?
Sorry. Well, there seems to be a problem with some of our users, and I want to ask those participants who don't have the sound, because here we have the sound, okay? Just please leave the audio and enter again, okay? You see this big blue button in the middle of the page. It is written leave audio, okay? Leave the audio and just enter again, okay? And it's gonna be fine.
Yeah, yes. In the chat, they're saying they solved with reconnecting. You know.
Okay,
I can hear you well, Jose, but
yeah, we didn't have any problem in hearing you, but I think some of our participants who are outside the university, they have some problems in connecting. I don't know what is the problem, but you can solve it by leaving the audio and entering again.
okay, but they can't hear you. Probably we have to
Okay,
type.
yeah.
Yeah, we
Okay,
have
this
to
is
type
my message. Now it's
Can
very
you read
good point. Okay.
Okay.
Okay, now thank you. And I wrote this message. I repeat it. Okay, so
Good, very good. Sorry, I mean no.
thank you, Muhammad Reza, for your comment. And if you just okay, I repeat this message again.
Okay.
Thank you, and Christoph, please continue.
Yeah, we continue. Okay, I'm sorry. I hope that you. I mean, the slides. There's so much text on the slide that you may even, yeah, can follow the talk. Okay, so we've been here at the equation where for this multi-step method and for BS here the first or the last term for in this sum here, when this is 0, this coefficient, then we have an explicit scheme, because then it doesn't depend on the new value, because we want to calculate k plus s, okay? And we have an explicit scheme because all the other one, yk plus j's, are already computed. If this BS is not 0, then the scheme is again implicit and has to be solved iteratively. And as it is with numerical hydro, you've heard Willy Klei yesterday, also for all these time integrators, as soon as it gets implicit, it also gets nasty, so to say. It's much more complicated to have an implicit scheme. So one simple example for a two-step method is the two-step Adams-Bashforth method. One, I guess it's from the 60s, I'm not sure. But you have here given the values at k plus 1 depend now on the values at the values at k plus 2 depend on the values k plus 1 and the values at k time k, or coordinate k. You see, you have to compare this method then to the standard Euler method, because you have to do the in principle, what you have to do is to evaluate your function at all the intervals at the end or the beginning, and you only have to evaluate it at these certain points. At the same points you do it as for Euler. You have no intermediate steps. So this is a two-step Adams-Bashforth method based on Euler. So you only have the function evaluation at the interval, no steps in between. And this is already a second order method, and you have the same computational effort for the evaluation of the force function as with the standard Euler integrator. Okay, just by using the old information from the steps before, you get a higher accuracy. Okay, this is all what I want to say about these multi-step methods. I have some literature on the slides, references where you can study for yourself then if you're interested more in these methods. Okay, now I want to talk a little bit about a very important class, especially for us physicists, astrophysicists of time integrators, the so-called symplectic integrators. This is a subclass of so-called geometric integrators. And also, these are just, I guess, 3, 4, or 5 slides. And as I mentioned before to Sarah, you can do a whole lecture only on symplectic integrators. So this is very simplified version of what you can do or how you derive a symplectic integrator. So it's just for you to show you the basic ideas of symplectic integrator. Okay, so symplectic integrators are designed for the numerical solution of a Hamiltonian system. Okay, so you have this canonical variables Q and P, canonical coordinates, and the H is here the Hamiltonian, some Hamiltonian, and the basic idea is that you have a transformation of the coordinates and momenta from T0 to a later time, T1, and this transformation is canonical, and hence by construction, phase space, volume preserving, and thus energy preserving and angular momentum conserving. So in the following, I will concentrate on so-called separable Hamiltonians, where you can split up a kinetic part, this T, which depends only on the velocity in our case, on the momentum, and this potential part, potential energy V, which depends only on the positions, or this Q. This simplifies very much the following terms. And this is also the case what we have, for example, in a classical n-body system. Things get worse if your potential energy or you have forces that depend on the velocity. For example, a gas drag force, which is proportional to a velocity. And as we will see also, hopefully later, when we use rebound, you have to especially tell the integrator that your force also depends on the velocity, because then some assumptions in the code cannot be made and the equations have to be solved differently. Okay, now it's getting a little bit theoretical. You might remember your lecture from classical mechanics. We use the Poisson bracket, which is defined here with this curly brackets. Poisson bracket of one of two variables, f and g, is given by first the derivative with respect to the canonical coordinate, then the derivative of the second function with respect to the canonical moment, minus vice versa. And if we introduce a coordinate set, which is just here this vector of q and p, we can write the Hamiltonian equations. Here this q dot equals dh over dp, and the p dot is minus the derivative of the Hamiltonian with respect to the canonical coordinate. Then you can write down these both equations very simple and say c dot is the time derivative of this set is given by the Poisson bracket of set with the Hamiltonian. Okay, so basic idea, just keep this in mind. Then we can define an operator which we call dh, and this is an operator which just combines the right hand side of this operator with a Poisson bracket. Okay, so dh set would be set Poisson bracket with h. Okay, if we define this operator in this way, then we can write down a formal solution of this equation, the whole equation, with that set from t is given by the exponential of some time t times this operator acting on the initial values. So, and this is not an exponential function, but this has to be seen as a consecutive executive order of the operator. Okay, so you cannot write down this straightforward easily. So this would be more or less a matrix equation or something. But this is just the formal solution, okay, of this equation here below. Set dot is given by set with h, okay, and then we integrate and we can get the time evolution or this solution at any time later on, given by the initial condition and a subsequent operator acting on this initial condition. Okay, basic idea, that's the formal solution. Now we use that we wanted to have a separable Hamiltonian, that we can separate the kinetic energy part and the potential energy part. This is how we do it. We again just write this h as t plus v and introduce operators which are now the Poisson bracket for the kinetic energy and the Poisson bracket for the potential energy operators. Okay, so no harm done. This is just that we use that we have a separable Hamiltonian where the kinetic energy just depends on the velocity and the potential energy depends on the positions or the canonical coordinates. Now we do the approximation. Okay, this is now where we can do, let's say, numerics. Okay, we approximate this time evolution operator here by a product of operators. So we write this exponential time evolution operator by a product of operators here, just to one special order tk plus 1. Okay, and as long as we make sure that the sum over this coefficients ci's and the sum of this coefficients di's, this is okay up to a certain order. Okay, now we can show, or it can be shown, that both operators, these exponential operators of kinetic energy and potential energy, provide a symplectic map. That is that they conserve the phase space volume. And since these commute, that is the subsequent acting on this operator again on itself here is 0, we can find that this operator is simply then given, if we write it here in the series kind, by 1 plus ci acting on dt. Okay, so with these findings, we can these terms break down and we just get these coefficients here for each of these exponential terms in there, each ci's. Likewise for the operator coming from the potential energy. So if you have this, you can write down a symplectic mapping that both conserves energy and momentum for Q and P. And this is what happens here. With these findings from the page before, we get a symplectic mapping which maps here Q and P set to new values coming from this operator, from the kinetic term, and same mapping that comes from the potential term with these coefficients di. Okay, and if you translate this back into coordinates for space and velocity, you end up with here these equations where the new positions are given by the old positions plus some coefficients times a velocity at the new times and space some delta t, and velocity is given by the velocity, the old times plus this force. This is this dq of v translated to space and velocity gives us this force term here. And you can now choose by a choice of these coefficients ci and di. You can construct symplectic mappings on orders and different orders that now conserve energy and angular momentum. And this is the main advantage of this. So this is the basic idea of it. If you are interested more, there's a nice paper in celestial mechanics dynamic astronomy from Yoshida and Nakai, symplectic integrators in their application to dynamical astronomy. I've put a link in the slides. I guess it's a nice introduction to the whole thing. Nowadays, I think the newest symplectic integrator which was added to rebound, for example, is an 11th order symplectic integrator. So I don't want to show them here. These are whole papers and pages of formulas. I don't think it makes much sense to show them here, but this is the basic idea of what you have. You want to have that the motion can be described by the canonical transformation of your variables, and thus gives you a conservation of energy and angular momentum. What you don't have is, for example, the exact orbits. So while a Runge-Kutta method can give you a more exact orbit, it has a dissipative term and you will lose energy over your time integration. And a simple first order symplectic Euler integrator can give you, let's say, wrong orbits, not the correct position, but your energy will be conserved on the average. And just to show you how what a small difference makes, if you have, for example, here, just took a Python code and implemented these two Euler integrators. The left one here, the standard Euler integrator, the right one is the so-called symplectic Euler integrator, which is also known as Euler-Kromer integrator. And I've integrated a two-body problem. I guess it was the Sun and Jupiter, I don't know anymore, for 1,000 orbits, and then looked at the total energy in the system. And you see the only difference between these two schemes is that here in the symplectic Euler, you use the velocity that you calculated before to calculate your new positions. Okay, that's the only difference. In the standard Euler, you just use the velocity from your old position, your old time step to calculate the new locations. And in the symplectic Euler, you first calculate the velocity by your current accelerations, and then you calculate the new positions with this new velocity from the new time step. This gives you a symmetry in the equations. Okay, and from the symmetry in the equations, you get directly this energy conservation. So if you look here at the total energy and you see over time and periods, then you see that in the standard Euler case, after 1,000 orbits, my energy is down to 10 to the minus 1. So in principle, this simulation is crappy. And I don't know if you can see this. See the blue line here down below. This is what people would say is well conserved. And if you zoom in now here, then you see this is now the Euler-Kromer integrator zoomed in. See on the Y scale, you see that this energy also changes during the periods. But on the mean average, although the energy changes, the system oscillates a little bit around with the energy is conserved just by changing these the velocity from previous time step to the current time step, which gives you the symmetry in the terms. Okay, so far for the different three categories of integrators that I wanted to show you. We had the single-step, one-step methods like Hongikuta integrators. We had the multi-step methods like Adam Bashford, Nystrom integrators. Then we had now the big class of symplectic integrators, which are important for long time evolution stability integrations, I would say. They have a lot of caveats, symplectic integrators. Maybe we can talk about this later, but you need, for example, you need a fixed time step. Otherwise, if you use an adaptive time step, then you break the symmetry in the equations, which directly leads to energy conservation violation. So, for example, if you have a system where you want to study collisions between planetesimals or so, then a symplectic integrator wouldn't be the best choice because you have to have a fixed time step. And with a fixed time step, it may be that you just lose collisions because you don't resolve them. So modern codes like Mercury or also Rebound use for collision systems mixed integrators, where you have an integrator for long time evolution, which switches automatically to an adaptive time step integrator, like a Hongikuta integrator, or in the case of Rebound, to an IAS 15 integrator for the collisions, to model the collisions. But more of this later. So what I want to talk about in the following now is that we have now seen the methods of how to integrate the equations of motions for n-bodies, but we will see, and all, as you probably already know, is that this calculation of accelerations is very slow and cumbersome as soon as you go to high numbers, because you have to calculate the acceleration with all n other particles. So you have n squared algorithm scheme. And so people try to speed up, to develop ideas to speed up such simulations by different methods. And I just want to show here two different methods of how one can speed up n-body simulations. First one is individual time step. Second one is just don't use computers, do not use software, use hardware, for example. And then the third one will be then approximate n-body solvers. These solvers that are also used in other codes in this gravity, in this galactic structure dynamic codes like Arepo or Gadget 2, or in or what you will learn tomorrow or the day after tomorrow to look it up. So first idea is you can have individual time steps. Okay, so for example, if you have different dynamics, or you have a system of different n-bodies that are maybe some are closer to each other and that does have a higher dynamic. For example, if you look at here these red stars, then they probably have to have a smaller time step because they have higher accelerations than a star, this yellow star here, further away. So this is a sketch from a nice review from Walter Dehnen in red here from 2011. The link to the S2PH is also in the slide. It's a good reading. It's a nice overview over different n-body codes and schemes so far developed. Well, it's almost 9 years old now. So what people do here is that they use individual time steps which are ordered in this binary form, 2 to the n, and then different n-bodies have different time steps. So this can be quite challenging because you need to a condition for when you choose or when an n-body has to have a lower or larger time step. So you have to have some conditions to do so. And then again, this individual time step also breaks symmetry. So if one particle switches from a higher time step to a lower time step, you might lose this symmetry that you want to have for energy conservation. So there was a lot of effort spent in developing such schemes, and I guess the codes like N-body6, which are used for stellar clusters, have all implemented such individual time step. I'm not quite sure if Rebound has it yet, but okay. But this is one possibility. The other possibility is just don't use your computer or your software. You can also just build up hardware. And this was done more than 20 years ago, especially the University of Tokyo was there, the main developer. They developed the special purpose hardware, which was called GRAPE, which stands for Gravity Pipe. And this was really a PCI board. Here you see it on the right-hand side. You plugged it into your computer with the PCI interface, I think PCI Express 8 or so, and then you got a library, and then you just throw the positions and the masses on this gravity board, and you got back the acceleration. So this was calculated in hardware. These boards were quite expensive. I guess one board costed about several $1,000, but it was then the best way or the fastest way to compute accelerations. And there was also a supercluster. This is what superclusters looked like in '95. Probably looks different now, but this was a supercluster with 32 great boards, which were used to calculate the time evolution of 10 to the 5 particles. And this was in '95. This was very great and very good. Okay, this was high-end, high-performance computing, and this was a really expensive supercluster. Nowadays, nobody uses such great boards. No, not nobody. This is always not true, never true. Nobody is never true. I think there are still great boards used in Japan. I've seen some SPH simulations which also used great boards. So if you have not a large number of particles, then you can combine these great boards also with hydrocodes. But nowadays, all the new modern HPC, high performance computing N-body codes use graphic cards because it's much cheaper to use a gaming graphic card than to build a special purpose hardware. Okay, so this is the two possibilities: just use individual time step or use special hardware. One other possibility is that you can think about the calculation of acceleration as n squared. So maybe we can decrease the computations, okay, of this n squared for some cost of lower accuracy. Okay, maybe if we have a lot of n bodies, we don't need to know the exact force of each of the bodies. Okay, we just want to use lower accuracy, and if we have a switch to, well, describe this accuracy, then it would be even better. So then this was a famous paper from Pete Barnes and Hutt here in Nature from '86, where they came up with the idea of a hierarchical tree method to reduce the number of terms in this sum to calculate the acceleration of one particle, one body I in a sea of n particles. And the question is, how can we do this in a physically correct way and that we don't make an error so that the whole simulation is wrong? The basic idea is now on the following slides, I want you to present the basic ideas of this hierarchical tree method as implemented or as introduced by Barnes and Hutt. So what you see here is, I guess, 1,000 randomly distributed points, particles here. And if you want now to calculate the acceleration on this particle on the lower right, I hope you can see this, then you have to calculate the n squared force from, or the force acting from all other particles on this one. But if you consider now that the acceleration, of course, is a function which is long range, but is much smaller for particles or stars that are further away, so the acceleration goes down with 1 over r squared, then the contribution in the sum of the particles in the screen area here will be certainly much larger than the contribution of these particles in the blue region, assuming now they all have the same masses. Okay, so we can somehow maybe reduce the sum by a different weight of these particles also. Okay, so the basic idea is here, these terms, or these terms in the sum acting from the particles in the green region are much larger than the one in the blue region. So Barnes and Hart came up with the idea, now we combine these particles in the blue region, we just calculate the center of mass of this blue region and the total mass of this blue region, which could be just this blue point here now. And we approximate the whole gravitational force acting from this blue region just by, let's say, a representation particle here acting on our yellow or pink, not yellow, pink particle here down below. Okay, so we calculate first the center of mass of this blue region, and then the total mass, and we say, okay, now instead of calculating the gravitational force acting from each of these individual stars in the blue region, we just calculate the gravitational force acting from this representation particle, pseudo particle at the center of mass with the total mass of this region. Okay, this would then lower the terms in the total sum. What we need is we have to sort these bodies in a hierarchical structure, because we have to somehow know when we can approximate them by a pseudo particle, and we need a condition for this approximation. And to do so, think of this: we have here now some, well, star field, or a bunch of stars, red stars here on the left-hand side, and our yellow star, where we want the force acting on it. We first have to sort these bodies in a hierarchical structure. We will show this later, how this is done. And then we have to add a condition for the approximation of long range versus short range. So I have to know somehow when I can approximate these stars at a single star, pseudo star, and then one and condition when I have to see these stars as individual particles. And this is done by the so-called theta criterion. So we have the distance to this central point, central mass, and then we say that the diameter of this bunch of stars divided by the distance gives us something like an opening angle. And if this opening angle is smaller than a certain value, and in principle people use theta equals 0.5, smaller than 0.5, we can use the center of mass and the total mass for the gravitational interaction, and do not have to look at these stars individually acting on our yellow star. Okay. Other possibility is what you can also do is, in principle, what you do here technically is you're doing a multipole expansion of the gravitational field mathematically, and here in this sense we only use the monopole. You can also then add additional quadrupole terms, and then you can even use a higher theta criterion, people used 0.8 in the literature if you also use here the quadrupole moments. Okay, so technically what you have to do is we have to build up a so-called Barnes-Hut tree. This is a structure from the computer science. Don't know if you're familiar with, but each node in such a tree, we have here a root node. This is the white circle here, which corresponds to the big square here. And you have 2 to the power of dimension children. These children are called subnodes of this root node are called children. So you divide your first root node in 4 in these, you sort the stars or particles, whatever you have, in these special nodes now, until each node has at maximum 1 star. Okay, so for example, here in this case, you have already in this order or this depth of the tree 1 star, so you don't have to go further. And here you have to subdivide the tree, have to create more children to be able to sort them into different nodes. So what you end up here is now that you have, you sort them here in the trees. Here, this is our particle, and we can now, with our hierarchical tree method, with this theta criterion, say instead of calculating the acceleration from these 2 individual stars on our yellow star, we just calculate the pseudo particle, so the total mass of this node and the center of mass of this node, and calculate then the force acting from this pseudo particle on our yellow star. And with this, you can lower the computational cost down to n log n. And if you're a little bit familiar with computer science, then n log n is the best thing that you can do. It can't get any better. So compared to n squared, you get n log n. And as soon as you have nowadays, I guess, more than 10,000 or 50,000 particles, maybe now with the new computers, then this tree method is much faster than a direct n-body. Of course, you break symmetry, you don't conserve energy or angular momentum anymore, okay? But this is the price we have to pay for the faster computation. So, and especially this is now the way how you would calculate self-gravity if you're using a particle method as SPH, for example, because you have already a tree or you have already particles, then you sort the particles in the tree, calculate the masses of the nodes, and then you can use the individual nodes to calculate the gravitational acceleration acting on single SPH particles. Okay, so if you do this with this stellar field here, then you would end up with such a tree. This is, for example, a tree that I've programmed some time ago. And if you look here, you see that in each node, there's at most 1 particle now. And you would now combine different nodes and calculate the center of masses and the total mass of these nodes, and use the theta criterion to calculate the accelerations. And with these techniques, now this is also already an older slide, it's also from this Walter Dehnen and red paper from 2011. Here you see the blue bullets, the blue points are approximate n-body methods like this tree methods, or there are also different methods, but these approximate tree methods. And the red points are direct n-body methods. And you see here over the years, the number of particles that we have been able to compute to calculate the gravitational force. This started all with von Hörner here in 1960. He did 16 particles, okay? Then there was this famous paper by Sverre Arset, I think it was 65, I don't know, 62, where he had 100 n-bodies. And so almost 10 years ago, we were already at 7 times 10 to the power of 10 particles. And I don't know where we are now. I'm not sure. I have to look it up, but we are now in the range of 10 to the 11 probably. Okay, for approximate n-bodies. And these are all codes running on high-performance computing hardware. So I have for you on the next slide maybe a nice overview of some n-body codes that you may know that float around in the community. These are the famous Mercury code, which was written by John Chambers in 2000, which is celestial mechanic codes. It's probably the best code compared to rebound for the celestial mechanics applications. So in principle, rebound first implementation was, I think, well, had the same functionality as Mercury. There are, I think, now many different versions now from different groups, because this Mercury code is online. You can download it. It's Fortran 77. I'm not sure if it's Fortran 90 or Fortran 77, but you can download it, and there are different versions floating around. There's even now, I guess, a GPU version. I'm not sure if this is publicly available, but I've heard from it. Okay. Then there's the n-body code by Sverre Arset, which is mainly used for star clusters. There are also various versions. I think the current version is n-body 6. I'm not sure. There's also a GPU version. Then there's a famous code Simba by Duncan, celestial mechanics, which had, I think, a nice symplectic integrator first. Then we have 2 codes or 3 codes from the hydro community, more or less. So Gadget is an SPH code that is used for galactic dynamics. It has this SPH tree method, or this Bounce-Hart tree, to calculate the gravitational forces on the gas. And there's also from Volker Springel, the Arepo code, which is a moving mesh code, also for galactic dynamics, uses some gravity solvers. I think not based on a tree. I think they solve the Poisson equation. Then there's the famous Flash code. You've probably heard of this from the Flash Consortium, which has a lot of applications in the astro community, from galactic dynamics to star formation, accretion disks, whatever. They have different solvers for gravity. There you can have a multi-grid Poisson solver, and of course also a tree. And then the code that I prefer, or that I, let's say, would advertise for all kinds of celestial mechanics, the code Rebound by Hanno Rhein. I have to say it's not my code, it's just that I know Hanno because he has used to be in Tübingen. And what I like most of the code you will see later. But again, these are only some codes. I also know that each year we have new n-body codes coming around. So also with each new kind of hardware, let's say, also new codes are developed, because if you let's say an n-body code for a GPU for a graphic card is totally different than an n-body code for a CPU. And moreover, if you have parallel codes for clusters, then you use different programming techniques, let's say, as if you have a code that cannot be parallelized. For example, if your number of particles in a planetary system is so low, smaller than 100 or so, then it makes no sense to parallelize the code for a cluster, because you have the limit of the bandwidth, or the latency of the network is so slow that you cannot get a good scaling for such low numbers of particles. So you wouldn't do a celestial code application on a cluster. Okay, this ends this theory section. I have put here some links for more literature, of course. So I've taken stuff for the slides from here, from this famous book by Sverre Arset, The Gravitational N-Body Simulations. This is a nice book. You can look into it. It's an older book, of course, but this is one of the key persons who have driven the applications and the new developments in N-body simulations. Then there is a nice book on geometric numerical integration from some mathematical colleagues here in Tübingen, Gerhard Wanner, Christian Lubich. They focus on the structural preserving algorithms for ODEs. They have nice applications of astrophysics, so it's worth looking into this book to see also a mathematical point of view of the whole problem. And then, of course, this is also the book that Willy Gleich showed yesterday, Numerical Methods in Astrophysics. There is a chapter on N-body. Here is this book, very nice book. There's a chapter on N-body in the book, about, I think, 30 pages or so, that also deals with tree methods and regularization and stuff, and shows some different time integrators. Approximately the thing that I've shown here. It's an introduction, I would say. So if you want to go deeper in the whole problem, then you will also have to look at this gravitational N-body simulations or this geometric numerical integration book. Then there's also the link to the Dana and Red paper, N-body simulations of gravitational dynamics. It's a nice review paper if you're interested. So I think it would be now a good time to
Thank you very much,
yeah.
Christoph. Thanks a lot for your great talk. I think if there is no problem, we can have some questions here. Yeah. Then we stop for about 20 minutes and come back at 2 o'clock Iran local time. Okay. So there is a comment by Mohammad Tagyebi. Could you please read it?
Okay, here, comment by Mohammad. I think they have higher orders than n squared as they use recursive logic, maybe n's. Is it correct to say that after running the code and by passing the time, the total error of the calculations increase? Yes, because you always have summation of errors. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. And Vahid now has a question. Vahid, please go on and ask your question. Thank you.
Thank you, Christoph. And I have a question about regarding the changing the code, because sometimes we're interested in using some methods for gravity, for example, moons or modified gravity or other versions of gravity,
Mhm.
which code, I mean, direct n-body or classical n-body or rebounds or something else, which one is better for changing the model of gravity to changing the integration of motion?
I guess in your case, really wait and see, and then you can see that rebound is really very versatile. So we had here also people connecting or making interfaces to Pluto or to Falgo, I guess. And we use here rebound for late stage accretion simulations where we calculate the collisions between planetary cores with an SBH code, and we do the long-term simulation of gravity of the whole planetary system with rebound. So rebound always offers you hook functions where you can define user-defined functions for special forces, so to say. You can easily implement this or add this to the code. The problem here is, in this case, if you want to add modifications or add own modules in the code, then I would advise you to use the C version or use the Python version and use a Python C interface so you can add your own physics in a fast program, because normally Python is not as fast as compiled C. So you can either use Cython then, the C compiled version of Python, or directly use the C interface. Yeah, but this is pretty straightforward to implement, I guess.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome.